The first section is our verbal reasoning. So we're now on to specific advice for each section. So the overview of verbal reasoning. So they're assessing how fast and accurately you understand written information. Topics are all going to vary, but all the answers rely only on the text. There is no prior knowledge needed. Not only is there no prior knowledge needed, you shouldn't be using prior knowledge. And that's where people trip up, because they use their prior knowledge. It will say something like monkeys can dance and monkeys can also eat bananas. And the answer will be like monkeys can't dance and monkeys can eat bananas. And you'd be tempted to pick that because you know that that's true. But in the text, it says monkeys can dance. And so you'd lose the mark on that because they're assessing not how much knowledge you have, but what your understanding of the text and how you analyze it. Is it very medical information? No. It's a whole mix. Sometimes they put in a medical research article, sometimes, and more often than not, it's literally just random literature articles about the most random topics. A lot of like geography and animal and political stuff is thrown in there. It's just your ability to read like information dense texts. So questions come in two formats. You have the true, false, can't tell, or key detail questions. So true, false, can't tell are generally the easier ones because usually for those ones, you'll either see the text, the information within the text immediately, or you can infer about that immediately. The key detail questions are harder because they'll ask you to understand the text more and they'll ask you to interpret the text more. For verbal reasoning, you have 11 short passages with 4 questions each, and you have 44 questions in 22 minutes. So, can anyone calculate how long that gives you per question? 30 seconds. And that is not a lot of time. 30 seconds is pretty less. So not only do you only have 30 seconds for each question, you also have passages to read with that time. So effectively, you've got less than 30 seconds for each question, which means that you need to get very, very good at being able to read the passage and then use the information to answer questions quickly, because most of your time is actually going to go to reading the passage. How do you know how to define the margins between can't tell and false? I think that comes more with practice, and we'll also have a look at some of the questions later on as to how we do that. But can't tell and false. Usually a false is a very definite, like it says in the passage that is incorrect. A can't tell is when they don't talk about that thing in the passage at all. Sorry to interrupt. Is SAT really required for medical schools? Do you mean the SJT? In which case, yes, the SJT is really important and every medical school cares about it. Does this mean it would be a waste to reread a question as it will waste more time to answer other questions? So the way that you should approach verbal reasoning, and I'm sure the next slides will talk about it, is go through, read the questions quickly once, so you know what information you want to be looking for in the text. So go through the questions once before even reading the text, and then read the text, because then you'll have an idea what information you're looking for and then answer the questions. That is the best way to approach it. The standardized aptitude test, I don't know. I never took that. The last time I took my SATs was year 6, so I'm not fully sure as to what you're asking. Yeah, that's in America. I don't think it is useful for medical schools here, at least. Yeah, question then text, like Zane has mentioned here. So you want to go through the questions first, then the text, so that you don't waste your time going through every single piece of detail in the text, and then start with answering the questions. Okay, like we said, skim first, scan for key terms, speed over detail. Only use what's explicitly stated. If unsure, it's can't tell. So that answers the question that someone was asking earlier about what's the difference between can't tell and false. False is they've specifically said in the passage that something is not true, or you can specifically infer that something is not correct or doesn't happen. When it doesn't talk about that piece of information in the way that you want it to, it's can't tell. So questions first, then skim the text and scan for key terms, and you should be able to answer a lot of the questions then. Clock control, so you spend about 2 minutes per passage. 2 minutes is 4 times 30 seconds, so that's 4 questions per passage. So you get 2 minutes to read the passage and also answer the questions, which is not a lot of time. Guess and move on if stuck. balance, speed, and accuracy. Again, easy to say that stuff. You only get it when you practice. Train your brain, so read daily and do UCAT style questions and build your pattern timing skills. Just comes down to practice. Preparation tips. So master active reading. Train your focus by reading complex texts and spotting the main message in each paragraph. So good stuff for that is if you're looking at super curricular activities, pulling up those like medical articles that you're reading for your personal statements, or the medical or the scientific magazines that you're reading, those are really good. Read them and try to summarize what it says in them and understand what it says and like analyze them. But also at the same time do the verbal reasoning questions as well. Someone has asked, read the passage, then read the questions. I found it easier, like I said, to quickly read the questions and then read the passage, so I knew what information I was looking for when I read the passage, because otherwise it's so much information that your brain can sometimes get lost and try to take all of it in, but you don't. That's the key thing. You don't take all of each verbal reasoning passage in, because you won't have time to do that. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of waffle in each passage, so you don't want to be reading each passage loads, because there's just so much in there that you don't need to know. Someone has asked, as the 4 questions are separate for the same bit of text, would you flag all for that text in order to read them? Okay, so if you've got 4 questions for each text, it depends. So if you're confused about one particular question, just flag that question and come back to it. If you're confused with an entire passage, which sometimes happens because sometimes the passages are really hard, flag the passage, move on, come back to that passage at the end of the verbal reasoning. Okay, time your reading. So practice under time conditions to boost speed and accuracy. Use a timer and summarize as you go. Practice the official VR questions and learn to locate answers quickly. So that's the most important part for VR. And that's why reading the questions first quickly is important, because you can then go back to the passage and you'll know which part of the passage to go back to look for the answer. Will we be doing some exam questions in this webinar? Yeah, we will. So common mistakes: reading too slowly, don't absorb everything, find what you need and move on. Misusing can't tell. Pick it only when info is truly missing, not as a guess. That's an important one. And getting stuck. Don't let tough passages trap you, move on and return later. So how to do speed reading. Read the intro and conclusion. So read the top and the bottom, because that generally gives you a summarized understanding of what's going to happen. And then skip irrelevant chunks in the passage that aren't relevant to your questions. And again, you only know that when you read the questions first. Preview questions to lock in keywords early. Spot key nouns and verbs, and then check the nearby text for context. And focus only on info-rich words. Skip the fluff. Stop hearing words, train to read in visual chunks. Yeah, so that's a really odd way to phrase it, but what they mean is that, like, stop going through a passage and reading every single word in your head, because it's going to be harder to do it. Instead, read like a couple sentences, summarize it in your head, read the next couple sentences, summarize it in your head. So speed reading example. So for this, for example, we've got 3 subsections, 3 subparagraphs in this text, and this is quite typical of a text that you're going to be getting in the verbal reasoning section. So what are we going to do first when we look at this text? Can you pop in the chat, when I get a text like this, if I want to approach it properly? Right now we're not looking at the questions. What do we want to do first to make sure that we get the general idea of the text? Yeah, skim, start and end. Intro and end. So what does the intro say? We're talking about period after Second World War, sociologist, approach to specialism, aim to understand why order exists in society at an interpersonal level. He contrasted this approach to one pursued by classical sociology, which tends to look at institution and groups over historical timescales in order to explain social forces. So what are we talking about here in these first few sentences? We can get an idea of what this passage is going to be talking about, which is understanding why order exists. And he is also basically creating a difference between his approach and classical sociology. So we don't read the whole thing. It depends on what you mean by read the whole thing. I'm going to skim the whole thing, but I'm not going to read the whole thing in complete detail. So classical sociology tends to look at institution over historical timescales to explain social forces. So we're talking about order in a society and why it exists. And then the middle paragraph will generally go into detail about the first paragraph. So we're going to skip that for now. Let's look at the last paragraph. So, idea of asking students to experiment on their own families or partners by behaving in an unsettling and potentially emotionally damaging way would be considered unethical. So now we're talking about applying whatever Garfinkel was talking about in our real life situations. So that's what the last paragraph is talking about. And then what I would do next is then go to the questions and then look at exactly what I need to find and then go back and read the whole thing. So then when we look at the middle paragraph, it says one of the most famous ways he devised to test his theories, activity called breaching experiments in University of California, going to the world, subvert their everyday interactions, and then refuse to trust. So what I'm doing is that I'm picking out the keywords and sentences so I get a general idea of what's going on, but I'm not going through each sentence and going, well, a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, Garfinkel encouraged many of his students to go. That is time consuming and doesn't tell me any relevant information and generally will get you like reading fatigued very, very quickly. I'm going, professor at the University of California, students go out into the world, subvert everyday interactions, refuse to trust that the bus driver would travel along. So I'm picking up the key phrases in that and I get a general idea of what's going on in the paragraph. And also it means that you don't get tired from reading the whole thing. Building stamina and tackling dense texts. So read articles on a screen daily to build stamina and mimic UCAT scrolling. Like we said, so that's reading your scientific articles, that's reading the news, that's reading generally any information published out there is pretty good for you. Instagram memes do not count. Boost speed and focus by reading in chunks and use a finger cursor and don't reread. Yeah, so like we did just now, read each paragraph in chunks and read each phrase in chunks. And I used my cursor of my mouse to go through the passage and read like to make sure that I knew exactly where I was so I wouldn't lose my place and waste time trying to find it again. Simplifies tricky texts into simple bullet points or mental summaries. Obviously you don't have time to actually make bullet points in the exam. You'd waste a lot of time if you tried to write that down, but as you're going through the text, mentally keep an idea of what you've been through and what's been talked about. And if you're stuck, find one or two key sentences and answer what you can and then move on. Okay, and building stamina and tackling dense texts. So that question, why did I get that? So again, we don't have questions for this, but if we once again go through the text and look at what we are looking at. So first, Hanami, watching flowers, Japanese custom, takes place annually. First cherry blossoms bloom across country. Ceremony of blossom watching, initially farmers correctly timed start of their rice planting, but in time became more symbolic, representing hope and replenishment of life. So generally, I know what this paragraph is going to be talking about. It's going to be talking about that ceremony of the first blossoming called Hanami. And then if we look at the last paragraph quickly, Sakura can mean either tree or its flowers. Technically, it's a flower of Prunus tree. Many different species, mild climate of the northern hemisphere, particularly suitable environment for their growth, 200 different types. 80% of the cherry blossom trees in the country was Some Yoshino, signature light pink flowers. Late March to early April, native Japanese sakura called Yamasakura, characterized by 5 petals. So at the top is an introduction to what we're going to be talking about, and the last paragraph is details biologically about the flowers. And then if you go through the middle quickly, that's widely associated with cherry blossoms. In the Nara periods, we're talking about a little bit of history there from 710 to 794. Used to admire ume or Asian plum blossoms. Soon, however, the splendor of sakura, fleeting flowers become a symbol of beauty, blah, blah, blah. So we've got a general idea of what's going on, and it should generally give you an understanding of where to find the information for the questions that you're given for each text. Okay, now we have a couple of questions. So we have the type 1, which are assertion and inference type questions, where you don't get the answer given to you exactly in the text, but you have to make an educated guess as to what would the answer be. Okay, right. So how this is going to work is that I'm going to put up polls for each question, and it will be anonymous, so nobody will know how much each answer has got. Then I'm going to give you guys some amount of time for each question. to understand the passage and go through the question and then tick the right question. So for this one, we're still on passage 1. And I will put up a poll for the first question and we'll go through that together. So let me create that and you guys can start having a look at the passage. Okay. Yeah, so I should have launched the poll for everybody. So I want you guys to have a look at the passage and then answer the questions. Yeah. I am just quickly going to run to the loo because I've had too much water in the last hour. So I will be back in 2 minutes, in which time have a go at, reading the passage and answering the first question. So has everybody who's wanted to put in their vote? As far as I can tell, yeah, it's still on question 1. So we're going to go through question 1, unless with each poll we'd have to create a new one. So right, let's have a look at the passage, and then we can answer the first question. So right, we've got kintsugi is the traditional Japanese art form of repairing pottery. Translation to golden joinery involves reassembling broken fragments of ceramic object with a varnish mixed with gold, silver. Yurishi, a glassy lacquer used in Japan, varnished for thousands of years. Skilled artisans apply metallic lacquer to glue ornament together, turning cracks into decorative elements. Start out like shiny veins. Old pottery not only restores a precious object, but helps it attain a new kind of beauty. Okay. Unknown exactly when or how it began, popular tale describes a 15th century shogun sent his tea bowl to China to be fixed after it had been shattered. As staple repair, most common method of restoration in China, bowl came back with drilled holes running on either side of the cracks, pieces held together with metal staples. Oh. However, Shogun, dissatisfied with the appearance of the bowl, ordered his own craftsman to invent a new method more pleasing to the eye of repairing the broken ceramic. Influenced by schools of Mahayana Buddhism, including Zen, accept imperfection and meditate upon changing nature of the world. Wabi-sabi, embracing transience of all objects, appreciating flaws as opportunities for growth and transformation. Kintsugi, by converting damaged objects into even more beautiful ones and making sure their cracks a source of wonder. Observing a man-made kintsugi becomes like watching the yellowing leaves on, reminding us that change is the natural state of the world. Okay. Great. So, right. When we look at the answers and the polls, let's have a look. So it seems to be broken between B and D. According to a popular story, kintsugi was invented because anyone who's brave enough for B or D, do you want to explain it? I'll give it a couple seconds if anyone is brave enough to try and explain B or D. If not, we can just go through it together. Seher Ali, would you like to explain it? If you want to, you can open your mic and have a go. Yeah, you can just turn your video and mic on and talk about why you picked the question, the answer that you did. I think it should let you do that. Can I keep vid off? Yeah, of course, you can keep the video off if you want to. So if you want...
Can you hear me?
Sorry?
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I picked D because it says here the shogun was dissatisfied with the appearance of the bowl and ordered them to invent a new method, and so, like that's why it got invented.
Yeah, and then anyone who picked B, would you like to tell us the staple repair left a row of holes in the ceramic? So Tressa, would you mind explaining why you picked B?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I chose B because I feel like that's the reason why it started in the first place. Because when it had like a few holes in it, that's when like the guy was like displeased, if that makes sense.
Okay, so your reasoning is, even though D is correct, B is what started it off, and so the technical reasoning is it was invented because staple repair left a row of holes in the ceramic. And Sarah says, oh, that makes sense too. So it does make sense. B comes before D. So shall we... But in this case, I would say it's probably D that is the answer, because the staple repair left a row of holes in the ceramic. That didn't necessarily like lead to the development of the making of that new bowl. They could have just left it with the staple repairs in the hole of the ceramic. It led to the invention of kintsugi because the shogun wanted a more aesthetically pleasing repair method. If he hadn't wanted the more aesthetically pleasing repair method, then the staple repair would have been fine for the holes in the ceramic. So you need to think about the fact that in this case, even though B and D are both true, what directly actually led to the kintsugi invention is because he wanted that aesthetically pleasing repair method, not because necessarily there was a row of holes in the ceramic, because he could have decided that the row of holes in the ceramic was aesthetic and he liked it. So both were correct, and I understand why you would have thought it was B over D, but in this case, D was the more like directly influencing answer. Yeah, like Natalia said, the immediate cause is D, but the root cause would be B. Yeah, exactly. So let's have a go at the next question. Which of these statements is supported by the information contained within the passage. So are there multiple correct options? No, because the correct option to that question would have been D. Because if you put down B, you said, oh, that kintsugi was invented because there was holes. It was technically invented because the person wanted a more aesthetically version of the holes. That's why it was invented. B was correct in the sense that it wasn't untrue, and it indirectly led to the kintsugi being invented. But D was the actual answer to the question. Does that make sense? So let's have a go at the next question, and I'll put up another poll to see what people think. So we've got again A, B, C, and D. So let's responses over aims, and this is question 2. So we've got a poll for question 2. So which of these statements is supported by information contained in the passage? So have a go at that for a couple minutes, and then we'll go through it together. You can't find the poll. As far as I'm aware, the poll should be live. Can someone else who has access to actually answering the poll maybe help her out? Press the 9 dots. That's right. Yeah, it's in the 9 dots in the corner. I didn't realize that's where you guys also had to go. Can you change your answer in the real UCAT? Yeah, up until the timer runs out for that subsection, you can change it. Yeah, the layout of this question is very similar to the actual UCAT, so it's pretty good. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. We've got 30 votes right now. $35. So I